Hello, I'm Gail Crosman Moore, and I'm here today with Beaducation.com to share with you some interesting skills that you can take forward to make any number of things. I'm giving you the basics and how to use felt as a sculptural medium towards whatever end you choose. We are making this little pouch, and we'll start out with making the pouch itself out of fleece, wool fleece that is, and then we'll finish up by embellishing it. And this is just a nice gift to give empty, or to fill with something that you've made, or to just store some of your treasures in. It's a fun time to spend together, and I hope you'll enjoy this. With these skills, you can make your own house. This grouping of ingredients are what you'll need in order to make this treasure pouch. I'll briefly go through what they are. Their uses will show up later in the video to tell you what you need them for and how much. Over here we have wool fleece, a plastic cup, white vinegar, Dawn detergent doesn't need to be Dawn, any dish detergent will work, a knee-high stocking, a nice piece of ribbon approximately a yard long, 7 inches or so of soft flex, size D Nymo thread, a size 10 beading needle. This is one of my glass beads, but that's not imperative. Any bead that will work as a closure. This is the stop bead that gives it some tension so it holds closed. Here we have sequins in 2 different shapes. These leaf shapes, these little discs. These are size 15 seed beads, and these are magatamas, which are, I use them a lot in my felt work because they are a teardrop shaped bead with a hole in the bottom, and what that does is you can just, when you sew it on, you cinch it down and it's invisible on how it's attached. It's pretty effective. It can turn into looking quite berry-like. If you purchase the optional materials kit, it will come with pretty much everything you need on here. You'll get the ribbon, one of my beads, this stop bead, the various sequins and beads, as well as thread, a needle. What you'll need to provide would be the soft flex, nylon, the cup, and these 2 things. And of course the fleece comes with the kit also. Hello! We're ready to start the next phase of this project. I have in front of me 3 different ingredients, and you can use a cookie sheet, you can use anything that will contain the water. This does use some water, so something with a little bit of sides to it is helpful. I have here a layer of like an anti-skid mat, and then a layer of shelf liner. And what this does, if you listen, it offers us a little resistance when we start to work the felt down into, when we start to full it is the word. I haven't talked about that yet. What makes felt felt is there are some barbs on the fibers, and through the use of hot water and soap and manipulation, we coax those fibers to interlock with each other and form a strong bond. And the way that we do that is by creating our own warp and weft. That's what we'll do on the top of this cup. We start by teasing the fleece out a little bit. I'm going to separate this nice long piece into at least 2 sections, maybe 3. I'm guiding this the whole way down when I'm pulling it apart. I'm going to come back here, and I'm just going to try and make this as even as possible by pulling those fibers out. You want the fibers to be as receptive as possible to each other. And the way that they are shipped and travel, it tends to mat the fibers down. So it's our job to tease them out a little bit and make them as friendly to their neighbor as possible. like anything else, these fibers come to me or anybody else that is not the one that produces them in varying stages of shape, good to poor. I want to divide this in half again because it's too wide. You'll see why in a minute. And we are going to lay this down in two different directions. The first direction, you don't want to go all the way down your cup because when it gets wet, it will stretch. So you want to start about a third, a quarter or a third of the way up the cup. You want to come over here, break it off. And we're going to lay this down about the same length. And if we're lucky, this will be the perfect length to go the third time. So there's our first layer. Now the second layer, we're going to go perpendicular to the first. So because this is what we teased out initially, this is what I'll use. We start at the bottom. We sort of tuck in all the fibers. As I go around, I'm overlapping ever so slightly the layer beforehand. You feel like an octopus at this stage, trying to keep it all together. You don't need to go all the way up to the top because you'll see in a minute the third layer will duplicate the first layer, and you don't need to have an extra heavy end on it. So that's a good place to stop that layer. And then we'd go in and we'd tease out. I oftentimes tease out all the fibers to begin with. This is thicker than I want it to be. So I'm going to divide this again. You'll find that it has almost a natural division in a lot of cases. Just follow through with that. So come back up here and we're duplicating the layout of the first layer. We'll go 1, 2. That one's not quite long enough, so we'll set it aside and we'll come back to this. So we're just going to divide this up a little bit. This is a pretty thin layer. I don't really like it, so I'm going to go back in. I'm going to add this to it. Tease it together. You know, the three layers, you want to consider the 3 layers and use 3 layers, and your end result will be determined by the thickness of those layers. So depending upon what you want to make will determine how much fleece you need. If I was making slippers, I'd want nice thick layers. If I was making a nice sheet of felt for something, I wouldn't need it to be as thick. So we're going to go back. We're going to go like this. We're going to sort of piece those together. You want to make sure the ends are receptive. So maybe I'll pull off a little bit in case this was the end that was all scrunched up. I'll just want to pull those fibers out a little bit so that they're happier in joining their neighbors. And this should do it. So the next phase of this operation is easier done if you have a helper. I have Lisa here to help me pull this down over this. this contains the fibers. So what we're going to do is to pull this out really far and hard, and 1, 2, 3, just come down over this. You want the fibers to be as smooth as possible. Thank you. So if you don't have someone to help you with this part, what you can use is an ace bandage to wrap it around this way and then secure it, or you could use a strip of muslin or whatever you have that's going to give you enough support to hold these fibers together, because when we put it into the water, your hands just aren't quite enough to hold it all together when you submerge. So mechanical means are helpful. First time I did this, I pulled it out and pulled it down over a hat I was making for my husband, and he's a trooper. He likes that hat, but it's very lumpy. So with that, we'll get some water ready and I'll show you the next phase. This next phase, we're going to want to add our Dawn detergent. And it's not an exact science, at least the way I do it. I'm sure some people have real opinions about this, but I'm going to say about a teaspoon to my water, and I have some auxiliary soap off to the side. What we're going to do next is submerge our piece and saturate it. Take the time to make sure all the bubbles are out and it's well saturated. I'm going to pull it up like this. I'm going to move this out of the way. And what you want to do is apply a little bit of soap to the surface. This starts to form a skin. You could go too long and it would fuse to the nylon, but it's a great way to get it to hold together. Always it seems that there's stages of this process where there's too much soap, and just know you can always change and fix everything that you do in Felt World. It's very forgiving. Roll it a couple of times. And it's going to be its most vulnerable in just a moment. When I peel off this nylon, it'll be like a newborn baby. So we get started like this, and then we just peel it back really easily, gently. Making sure it's not caught up anywhere. Okay, so we have the beginnings of our pouch. We're going to just do what we did with the nylon, without the nylon, for a couple minutes, and try and establish a firmer skin. Now at this point, you'll see I went down when I laid it out a little too far. I have the fleece hanging off the edge. At this point, if they're confusing or getting in your way, you can just take your scissors and trim them off. Okay, so we want to make sure they're out like this. This next phase is quite delicate. I want to pull the cup out. And I'm going to want to go around and create that same skin on the inside. So I'm just going to pat soap around it. I'm really being delicate at this point. Just sort of compressing the fibers. If you have long fingernails, this is a place to really watch where they are. You could easily poke a hole in it. I'm adding a little bit more pressure. Felt is really all about the manipulation. The soap does a couple of things. It lubricates it, so if I didn't have the soap right now, my fingers would be catching the fibers and moving them around. This lets me sort of glide over the top of them. So it lubricates, and it also changes the pH of the fibers. It makes the scales that are inherent in the wool fibers swell up and interact and connect with their neighbors. Okay, I'm just sort of rubbing from the base up to the rim. If you find you have too much soap at this point, you can go back into your water and just squeeze some of it out. I kind of like too much at this point. There will come a time soon when I'll want to rinse it to get rid of the soap, but for now it just lets me know that I'm going to glide and not be too abrasive. Between the last take and this has been through a subtle transformation. We spent about 5 minutes doing that same motion that I last left you with, and it was quite sudsy at that point. And what I did is I wrung it out, and it came back quite a bit firmer. Now at this stage, I'm going to trim the edge. I like to keep a natural edge, almost like the decal edge on a piece of handmade paper, but I'm going to trim away the thin spots. So and the parts that are really long. So there's a little hole here, if you can see that. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm just going to go down and get a nice natural edge. And then this one is just sticks up too far. So you get to call it. And I'm just going to continue to work it. This next motion does the most for fulling your form. And when I say fulling, what I mean, that's like the work hardening aspect of it. One thing you always want to remember is, this is hard for me, I always have to close my eyes to remember, it shrinks in the direction that you're rolling it. So though I'm not really rolling this, it would be the same motion as if I went like this, which is often used in felt making also, okay? So this is going to be longer and skinnier. You open it up, come back, fold it back down, and roll it again. Okay, if it gets too long and too narrow, what you do is you counteract that by going this way, and that'll make it short and squat again. So this way, going back and forth between those motions will ensure that it has even shrinkage. Then I'll open it up, and I might start to roll it from this end that way. Okay, this is what I like to do the best. It really firms up quickly with this motion. And I'm making sure that I'm doing the edges also, because they tend to not get fold if you don't make yourself aware of that. Same with the tip down here. Now I could create quite a sharp end on this if I kept going in this direction. I'm adding quite a bit of pressure at this point. You really cannot get a nice hard felt without working. You can even pick it up and throw it at this stage. That really just shocks the fibers into condensing. Do you see? This has all these puckers here. That's where the fibers have found a neighbor and grabbed on. And you can go as long as you like. I mean, you don't want this to shrink down to nothing, which it would do if you continued to work it. So you determine when it's firm enough for your needs. You know, if you're going to use it, you know, put it in your pocketbook and carry it around every day, you might want to work it a little bit harder than if you were going to just put it on a shelf to look pretty. You can shape it this way. I'm pretty much to the point where I will go rinse this well, and what I want to do in moderately cool water is to rinse all the available soap out of it, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the final rinse in a vinegar bath. Okay, this is the final phase of this project before we embellish it. This is a rinse in vinegar, and what this does is bring it back to a neutral pH. So I have some nice cool water here, and I'm just going to add that much, probably 1/8 of a cup to this, maybe not quite. And I'm going to submerge my piece and just sort of, as my mother used to say, sozzle it around. It's incredible how quickly a vinegar bath will just get rid of all available soap. And then we'll just wring it out. Do that one more time. I'll move this aside. And I always have a couple of terry cloth towels handy when I am making felt. I'm going to lay this down. I don't need to shape it yet. Lay it down. And I'm going to roll this up. And I will usually just put it on the floor and step on it, and it gets rid of, I bet, 90% of the moisture. And then what I do is I take this opportunity to shape it in the way that I would like it to dry. So in this case, it's looking pretty good. I might just pull and push, prod the edge a little bit so that they're even both front and back. If you want it to dry in the round, you might bring back your initial cup. Go like this. I could change the bottom totally with the use of this block at this point. You see how much stretch it has at this point? You really can change the shape. I could turn it into like a big bellflower if I wanted. See the difference? I could dry it then to be almost like a vase. So it's the beginning skill towards making any number of things. In this case, we're just going for a little bag, but you can tell it what to do. So here we have our newly felted and dried pouch that we are going to start to embellish. And what we'll do first is to create this little end with the use of these magatomas. Our next step is to load up our needle with approximately 2 yards of Nymo D. I like to use the thickest thread possible for my intended purpose, and I want to show you a sweet little knot that I use. It's called a tailor's knot. I have the tails going off to the left. I lay the needle perpendicularly over the tail. I have a big loop off to my right. You want to make sure it's even. And then I'm going to wrap, depending upon how large a knot I want, maybe 3 or 4 times. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to hold that tight and then pull the whole thing through. Now I can feel that I have an extra loop here. Doesn't really matter. I'll just cut that off. And then test it to make sure it's not going to affect. Come on. Okay, that's a nice one. All right, so I pick up my pouch. The beauty of felt is the fact that you have these layers in this loft, so you can travel anywhere you want in this pouch and hide all your stitching from the underside. So I'm going to try and determine pretty much where the apex of this is, where the very bottom of it is. And I'm just going to start. And it's one bead at a time. I pick up a little bit, cinch it down, and I just keep on adding to create this berry effect and fill in where I need to. Switch it around a little bit to get another orientation. Boop. It's interesting, what we're using as a cloth here is a piece of felt, not a handmade felt, but a commercial piece of felt. And the first time I tried to do that, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a handmade felting cloth, or I mean beading cloth, and it's a bunch of loops, so that when you catch on it, it catches. So I just keep going. I don't use any wax or anything to condition my thread. I used to when I did a little bit more seed bead work, but I didn't like the residue it left, and it didn't seem to make much difference in the tangleability or lack thereof in my thread. So it just saves me a step at this point. But boy, that's really just a personal thing. Everybody has an idea, and I encourage you, if you're not familiar with this, to try all things to begin with and make up your own mind, because there's certainly no one right way to do it, or one wrong way. So as you see from this, across the cap of this, we have probably 1.5 inches. Once again, no right, no wrong, whatever appeals to you. I do want to say though that as you're going, you don't need to struggle with placing this bead next to this bead next to this bead. Just go randomly and you can fill it in as you go. So I'm at the stage where I'm starting with the next phase, which are these leaf sequins. And if I want to make them really nice and full, I tend to, because they are cupped, to pick up a series of them going this way. And then we'll do a second series where we pick them up going that way. So go here, and we just, that's an easy stitch for me. I don't need to bend and stretch and bend my needle or work too hard with my fingers. And then I reposition it, cinching it up tightly. And I'll just go around once this way. Once again, if I feel it coming through on the underside and pricking my finger, I want to back it out. I don't want the stitches to show on the underside. I think that's one of the coolest parts of the felt, is that it can be so clean on both sides. So I've completed the circuit of the green leaves, and now I'm going to switch to the turquoise sequins. I'm going to pick one up, and you know, this is a place where you can express yourself. You can pick up 3 and make a little picot on top, which maybe I'll do to show you how. 1, 2, 3. Bring it down to the surface of the pouch, and I'm going to back this off just to show you what I want. What I like to do is to create a little bit of breadth in my stitch. It makes for a secure attachment. And then I'm going to bring my needle up the next place I want to place a sequin. Now picot, you sometimes have to go back in and rearrange the way they settle down onto the surface, because you want it to look like a little bit of a clover or fleur-de-lis kind of idea. So there he is. And we'll move on to the next one. And I'm ready to place the next one. And this just goes on for a while, and it's interesting. I find the decisions I make on where to put the next one. It's all relative. So this row is pretty random, and then the subsequent rows are all placed in relation to what is in the row before them. I don't want to just lay them out in total an even pattern. I like an element of random. Oop. Where I want the next one. And on we'll go. So I'm feeling like this composition is pretty complete at this point. I like the rhythm, and that's all I need to do is visually please myself, I guess, and I urge you to do the same thing. My last sequin sewn down was here, and then I traveled in between the layers to come up here, where I'll place 3 half hitches underneath this sequin. I go here and I just pick up a little bit of the fleece from underneath. I come down here and I create a loop. I come through the loop, and then I'm just going to cinch that down. I'll do that 2 more times. If you don't want to have that much bulk underneath that sequin, you can always travel to any of these others and do a half hitch or 2. A little bit of these things happen. Gets a twist in it. Okay. We'll go one more time. There we go. Trim that off right there. And there's that finished part. So this is a large needle that I neglected to talk about earlier in the materials, but it's available at any fabric store, needlework store. And basically you want to look for a needle that's just large enough, has a large enough eye to accommodate your ribbon. And you know, whenever you're being watched, things are more difficult. You want to thread it in half. And what this will do is go around the perimeter of your bag. So you don't want to go too close to the edge. In case you have a thin edge here, I like to use that decal edge, as I said before, but I like to come down about here where I start. Now where you start is where you're going to end up and where your bead closure will show up. So you want to think about that when you start to sew. I like it off center a little bit. And if you have trouble pulling it through, you have a pair of pliers handy, it's helpful. You just want to go around the rim like that. Maybe, inch and a quarter stitch. Felt is tough, don't worry about hurting it. So I made my complete round. Notice that I've come out almost where I started. And what I still have my needle attached here, and this will go through both of these beads. So we've got that one, and then we'll come here and we'll string up the little one. And we'll cut this off. You can get a fancy angle on it at a later date. And then this is where our soft flex comes in. We're sort of creating a needle. There isn't enough space for this big needle and all 4 of these strands of the ribbon to come through the beads. So I'm coming down here, and I might as well just come up through both of those beads to start with. And you do one at a time. So I've created the eye of my needle here like this. I'm going to pull that up through both of these. And I'm going to do that again. All right, I'm ready to pull through the last strand, and I'm just making that same loop, pulling up here, creating the eye of my needle. This one might be a little trickier because I'm really running out of space at this point. There's one through, 2 through, ta-da! Yay! Now at this point, if you need to rearrange any of these, you can just pull them to get them all to be the same height. You can decide whether you want to put a knot in the end of these individually, or whether you want to put a knot in the whole batch. And there's your pouch. All right, so we've spent a nice chunk of time together here, and I hope that you've had fun acquiring this new skill and can take it in many different directions, whether it's, embellishing, having more comfort with embellishing, or the felt making, which you could make larger to create a pocketbook, or any number of things. So just the hardest part with this is getting your hands wet. I mean, it's a simple process, but for me, I needed to see someone do it. And I think that's always a helpful way to get started. So I hope you have fun. Thank you for joining us here at Beaducation.